In this video, we are going to talk about 8th grade integers. Most of this should be review from 6th and 7th grade, but what you find in school that a lot of the material in the beginning is review from previous years. So an integer is a whole number on the number line. It includes 0, and it has negative whole numbers. One thing to understand about integers is that when it's positive, the further away it is from 0, the bigger the number. Versus if it's negative, the closer it is to 0, the bigger the number. From there, we're going to learn about integer addition and subtraction rules. What your teacher might do is give you some exercises about how we should understand that if we have 52 plus negative 67, this is the same thing as saying 52 minus 67. So therefore, even without doing the math, we know that it's going to be a negative number. We're taking away more than what we have. Or another way that we could look at this is that we have 52 positives and we have 67 negatives, and if they offset each other, it's going to end up being a negative number. Once we understand the rules related to integers, then we could just do some addition and subtraction. Again, most of this is something that we know. We've worked with the positive side of the number line already, and it's really the negative numbers that's kind of confusing, or can be confusing. The one that many of my students get confused about is when two negatives are in a row, like this problem here, 1 minus a negative 2. In this case, the two negatives turn positive, and this is the same thing as saying 1 plus 2, which is going to equal 3. If this is something that's confusing, try to remember how you subtracted negatives in the past, and chances are, with just some practice, you'll be able to remember what you did in 6th and 7th grade. From there, we can also review integer multiplication and division rules, which is basically that when you're multiplying two numbers, if one of the numbers is negative, then the answer is negative. So if it's positive, negative, the answer is negative, or if it was negative, positive, the answer is negative. And the important part here is that when it's negative times a negative, it's positive. And it's good to memorize some of these rules. At the same time, sometimes it's also, or maybe better, to understand why things occur. So here with some of my students, I have to, in the beginning, tell them that when you have two negatives in a row, we just turn it into a positive. But another way of looking at this is the same thing as saying 1 minus a negative 2. And there's an invisible negative 1 here. So it's almost like saying it's negative 1 times negative 2. And that's why this is 1 plus 2, which equals to 3. If we understand the rules, then we can just start doing the multiplication and division with integers. So when we're talking about two numbers, if one of the numbers is negative, the answer is negative. If both numbers are negative, the answer is positive. So again, most of this is are problems that we've worked on before, and they're relatively simple. We just have to remember the rules. This is 6. This is negative 6. Negative 6. And negative 2 times negative 3 is positive 6. Finally, as review, you may have to evaluate numerical expressions, and this is just where you're working with integers, but you still have to remember your order of operations. Whether you learned order of operations using PEMDAS or GEMS, doesn't really matter. Just understand that we do parentheses first, exponents next. And the mistake that many of my students makes is that it's not multiplication and division, it's multiplication or division, and addition or subtraction. So it really depends. It depends on the problem. If you had a problem such as negative 12 divided by 3 times 2, we don't do the multiplication first. When we have both division and multiplication, or multiplication and division in the same line, we go left to right. And in this case, it'll be negative 12 divided by 3, which is going to be negative 4, times 2, which is going to be negative 8. It's not going to be, we don't do the multiplication first for this problem. And here's just a quick review of 8th grade integers. And now you could just do some practice just to really just remember the things that you learned back in 6th and 7th grade.